I used to wonder if I ever truly existed in my parents' lives, not just in the abstract way of a child doubting her worth, but in the sharp, splintering sense that maybe they had edited me out, frame by frame, moment by moment, until what was left of me only lived in my own memory. My name is Ellery Shaw, and if you walk into the Ellery Gallery on 9th and Braxton in London's West End today, the first thing you'll see are two large oil portraits, a woman in a pale blue blouse with pressed lips and haughty eyes, and a man in a wool suit with a closed posture and a gaze that seems to look past you entirely. Together, they hang in gold leaf frames on the farthest wall of the main exhibition room. Their names are Marjorie and Caldwell Shaw, my parents, and I hung their portraits there on purpose. Not because I loved them, but because this gallery, this space filled with light, color, and names proudly signed in the corner of each canvas, is the very thing they tried to deny me. It's the monument I built with the pieces they left behind, the proof that I existed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with the photographs, or rather, the lack of them. I was 17 when I noticed. It was a Thursday in April, spring break, and I was home from art school for a week that felt more like a punishment than a reunion. The Shaw estate, a Georgian manor outside Surrey with endless corridors and the kind of chill that gets into your bones, never felt like home. I was walking past the library when I paused outside the Hall of Frames. It was something my mother took great pride in, an entire corridor of family photographs, perfectly arranged, curated like a museum of our lineage. I used to walk by them and feel that odd mix of pride and alienation that only someone born into a legacy can understand. But this time, something felt wrong. My parents, my brother Julian, our holidays, even the gallery openings they'd attended together in Florence or Paris, every photo remained. Only I was missing. Not just absent, erased. It wasn't just one or two frames. It was every photograph I had once been in. The Christmas in Vienna when I was 10, gone. The family portrait in the lavender field, where I had been between Julian and Mother, gone. My third birthday party, which I remember because of the violet icing and the gold paper crown, gone. Not a single photo with me in it remained. I stood there, frozen. My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe they were getting them reframed, restored. But even then, the empty gaps in the photos where I should have been were too precise. In one photo, a sliver of my sleeve remained, a pale yellow stripe sliced at the edge. They hadn't just removed me. They had surgically cut me out. I confronted them that evening. Dinner was served in the smaller dining room, the one reserved for weekdays. Caldwell was halfway through carving his steak, and Marjorie had that ever-present glass of red wine poised by her lips. Julian, always too quiet for his age, poked at his roasted potatoes without looking up. "Where are the photos of me?" I asked, the words louder than I meant them to be. No one looked surprised. Caldwell didn't even pause. "Don't raise your voice, Ellery." "I'm not—" I stopped myself. I took a breath. I was looking through the family corridor. I'm gone. Every image I was in has been edited. Why? Marjorie finally looked at me. "You're being dramatic." "Am I? Because I'm fairly certain I used to be in that Christmas photo from Vienna, and now it's just the three of you." She sipped her wine. "Perhaps it's a sign." "A sign of what?" Caldwell finally set down his knife. "That you are no longer part of this family." The words hung in the air like fog. Julian froze, his fork mid-air. I blinked. "Excuse me?" Marjorie stood. She walked slowly to the sideboard and refilled her wine glass, back turned. "We've discussed this, Ellery. You made your choices." "What choices?" "You rejected everything this family stands for," Caldwell said. "Your refusal to go to Oxford, your insistence on that school." "It's the Royal College of Art," I said through clenched teeth. "It's not some fringe commune in Berlin." "It's not the legacy we built for you." Marjorie turned around, glass in hand.
And legacies are not optional, dear. They are inherited, respected, passed on. You spat on yours. I stared at them. The weight of their disapproval felt like a physical thing, pressing against my chest. So what now? You're disowning me? Marjorie raised an eyebrow. We already have. Caldwell nodded once. You are no longer Ellery Shaw. I laughed. It was that hysterical kind of laugh, hollow and uncontrollable. You can't erase someone's name just because you disapprove of their degree. Julian finally looked up. His voice was small. They changed the trust, Elle. You're not in it anymore. My breath caught. Caldwell didn't flinch. We adjusted the documentation accordingly. Marjorie added, and the photos are a symbolic continuation of that choice. That night, I packed my things. They didn't try to stop me. Not when I closed the door behind me, not when I rolled my suitcase down the gravel path, not when I got in the cab I called myself. That night, I became someone else. Not by legal name, but in spirit, in defiance. Ellery Shaw, erased from history. But not for long. I didn't sleep. I rode the train back to London as the countryside blurred past, and when I got to my tiny flat, more cupboard than home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my sketchbook. And I drew. I drew for 12 hours. My fingers cramped. My eyes burned. But I kept going. A floodgate had opened and it wouldn't close. I sketched the hallway of photographs, only this time the empty spaces glowed. I sketched the Christmas scene, except now I stood at the front wearing the crown. I sketched the look on Marjorie's face when she told me I was no longer her daughter. I drew her again and again, until the wine glass looked like it might shatter in her hand. By dawn, I had a wall of rage. But it didn't feel like destruction. It felt like truth. That week, I asked my tutor at RCA for a special review. I pitched a concept I called erasure, a visual installation of what it meant to be erased, not just physically, but emotionally, culturally, familially. He approved it. I worked harder than I had ever worked before. I gathered every image I could find, photos from old friends, classmates, old art competition snapshots, archived gallery flyers. I digitally restored myself into each image using charcoal overlays, paint smudges, and sculpture cutouts. I layered text, audio, reflections. I wrote poetry on the back of found canvas. I created a hallway with mirrors that blurred your face as you walked through it. The show opened 4 months later. Critics called it haunting, revelatory. The Guardian featured a 2-page spread titled The Girl Who Reappeared. I didn't invite my parents, but they showed up anyway. They stood outside the RCA building, staring up at the posters with my name, Ellery Shaw. And they left before the exit opened. But they saw it. And so did the rest of London. By the end of the season, I had 4 offers to host permanent installations, but I didn't want to be part of someone else's space. I wanted my own. So I found an abandoned frame shop on 9th and Braxton. It was run down, but it had potential, the bones of something sacred. I took out a loan. I painted the walls myself. I built the gallery I was never allowed to visit. I called it The Ellery. And for the grand opening, I curated a new show, The Portraits of Power. It featured oil paintings of the people who tried to silence me, my father, my mother, each portrait eerily lifelike, slightly exaggerated, bathed in unnatural light that made their features stiffen and twist. People stood in front of Marjorie's portrait for minutes without speaking. One critic called it a masterwork of emotional violence. I called it therapy. They never responded, but I know they heard. Because a week later, Julian called me. He whispered, Elle, you need to come home now. Why? His voice cracked. Because Mother is planning something you can't undo. And just like that, everything I built was suddenly in danger.
Everything I built was suddenly in danger. I stood in the gallery lobby staring at the phone in my hand like it had just cursed me. The words Julian said played on a loop, louder and more frantic every time they replayed in my mind. Mother is planning something you can't undo. It wasn't just a warning. It was a clock starting to tick. I locked the doors of the Ellery. Despite the fact that the gallery was closed that day, I always left it open to passerbys, artists, friends. But today, I twisted the old brass key in the lock with shaking fingers and then drew the blackout curtain. Julian hadn't told me more because I'd hung up on him. I hadn't meant to. My thumb trembled and grazed the screen. It ended the call. I stood frozen afterwards, staring at the blank call screen, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. He hadn't called back. Julian wasn't like me. He didn't push. He didn't repeat himself. He whispered secrets into the air and let the wind decide if they mattered. And I'd silenced him. I ran to the back of the gallery where my small office was. It wasn't even a full room, just a curtain behind the storage shelves where I kept a desk, a vintage banker's lamp, and a corkboard covered with color swatches, sketches, and post-it notes of ideas. I called him back. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. It was still early, barely time in the morning. Maybe he was in class, or the reception had always been terrible, especially out past the orchard wing. But I knew better. I knew the sound in Julian's voice wasn't casual. I called again and again. By the 7th time, my hand shook too much to keep going. I needed to do something. I needed answers. I pulled up the private security camera feed from the gallery's installation room, the one with the portraits of my parents. Still intact, still there, unbothered. But that wasn't what worried me. Julian wouldn't have called unless it had something to do with them. So I did the one thing I never thought I'd do again. I booked a car back to the estate. Surrey was colder than I remembered. The sky had turned a dull metallic gray, the kind that pressed low against the land like it was trying to suffocate it. The driver, an old man with a kind voice and no interest in small talk, dropped me off just before the gates. I walked the rest of the way. Everything looked exactly the same. Same gravel underfoot, same wrought iron gates, same manicured hedges, same hedgerow maze curling to the left of the main drive. But my name no longer belonged to this place. I rang the gate buzzer. Silence. Then a crackle. Who is this? It's Ellery. More silence. Then, Miss Shaw? No, just Ellery. The buzz of the gate unlatching. As I walked the long drive, I noticed something. Windows closed, curtains drawn. No car in the front drive. Not even Julian's old green Volvo. The silence was different. Not just estate silence. It felt like the air had stopped. The front door opened before I reached it. Anya stood there, fidgeting with her apron, eyes wide. I didn't think you'd come. Julian called me. What's going on? She glanced behind her. They're not here. What do you mean? They left early this morning. Took everything. Everything? Anya stepped aside and motioned for me to follow. The inside of the house had been gutted. Not in the obvious way, furniture still lined the halls, rugs still lay across polished floors, but the paintings, the photos, the collections of silver figurines and rare Japanese vases, gone.
I walked into the hall of photographs. Every frame, empty. The walls, barren. "Where's Julian?" I asked. Anya's voice trembled. "He left me a note. Said he had to follow them. That he didn't know where they were going, but he'd try to reach out when he could." My breath caught. They ran. But why now? Then I saw it. A note folded and tucked under a silver dish on the main console. My name in Marjorie's handwriting. I opened it. "Ellery, I must commend your persistence. Or is it desperation? Either way, you forced our hand. We are not your subjects. We are not your muses. And if you insist on using our names, our faces, our history for your so-called art, then consider this our response. We are no longer available, neither to you nor to the world you've dragged us into. You want to build a legacy without us? Let's see how far you get without a single thread of truth left behind. Mother." I folded the note once, then again, each crease sharper than the last. She wasn't just running, she was erasing me in real time. I returned to the Ellery that night with numb hands and a heart racing so fast it hurt to breathe. I turned off the alarms, opened the blackout curtains, unlocked the doors. I walked directly into the portrait room, stood in front of their paintings. I looked into my father's lifeless, glossy eyes, then at my mother's wine-red lips, and I whispered, "Game on." They wanted to disappear? I'd make them impossible to forget. That night, I started a new series. Not portraits this time, installations, full-scale recreations of rooms they had abandoned. My childhood bedroom, complete with books they threw out, a sculptural recreation of the family table where I was told I no longer existed, a hallway lined with shattered frames, glass echoing beneath the viewer's feet as they walked. But the centerpiece, the piece that would open the next Ellery exhibition, would be a reconstruction of the empty estate. I called it Inheritance, and I wasn't building it alone. Because 2 days later, Julian returned. He looked different, older, ragged around the edges, like someone who had traveled through time instead of across countries. He handed me a flash drive. He said he copied everything before they left. Bank accounts, property deeds, trust records, even the original family archives. I stared at him. Why? Because you deserve to exist, even if they don't want you to. I opened the drive that night, and what I found changed everything. Because buried inside an encrypted folder was a file labeled E-Paternity. I clicked it, and I learned the truth. Caldwell Shaw wasn't my biological father, and Marjorie had kept the secret from everyone, including him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you.
Including him? The screen burned with the truth I'd never imagined. The file, dated 23 years ago, was a medical document, sealed and digitally signed by a private clinic in Marseille. The DNA test results matched my mother, Marjorie Shaw, as the biological mother, but the second parent listed was not Caldwell Shaw. It was a name I'd never heard before. Laurent Delacroix? French. Age at the time of testing, 39. Occupation? Unknown. Nationality? French-Algerian. There was a blurry scanned photograph clipped to the corner, grainy, sun-faded, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The slope of the nose, the shape of the eyes, The high cheekbones and olive skin I'd always assumed came from some distant maternal lineage. But no, it was him. My real father. And he had been completely erased. Julian sat silently across the table from me, his hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence between us was louder than any revelation. I scrolled through the rest of the folder. Letters. Dozens of them. Some typed, some handwritten. From Laurent to Marjorie. From Marjorie to someone named Beatrice, his sister maybe? They were in English, French, and sometimes broken blends of both. Most were dated between 1998 and 2003, the year I turned 5, the year Caldwell forced Marjorie to cut ties. One letter caught my eye. August 12, 2001. Ma chère Marjorie. You asked me to stop writing. You said it was dangerous, that he was suspicious. But how could I stop when she still says Papa in her sleep? Does she still remember me? I dream of her face, of the way she used to grip my fingers. I know the last visit was short, but you promised. You promised I would not vanish. You promised you'd keep my drawings. How many more promises will you break before she forgets my name entirely? L. I felt sick. I turned to Julian. Did you know? He shook his head. No. But I always felt different. Like something was off. And Caldwell never found out? Not from what I saw in the files. The test results were stored separately, password protected, hidden even from the family solicitor. Marjorie had buried the truth so deep, she didn't expect anyone to find it. She had rewritten me. But now, I had the pen. I spent the next month in a storm of creation. The Dallery closed to the public, curtains drawn. Julian became my sole collaborator, assistant, researcher, sound tech, translator. He handled all communications while I disappeared into something that felt like less a project, more like a resurrection. The new exhibition would no longer be called Inheritance. I renamed it Pair. It would be my most personal show. A series of installations, paintings, projections, and audio performances reconstructing my childhood through 2 timelines, the one I lived and the one I should have lived. Side by side, room by room. In one chamber, I built a reconstructed nursery, half in muted blues and grays, toys carefully aligned, books removed from the shelves, light, cold, and white. The other half, chaotic, warm, watercolor walls with phrases in French scribbled across them, wooden toys, broken but loved, a framed print of a Marseille coastline. I think you're my father. The man didn't move. The brush in his hand hovered midair like he'd paused mid-stroke on an invisible canvas. I noticed that his hand trembled, not with age, but with something deeper. Recognition. Dread. Hope. I wasn't sure. Finally, he spoke. His voice was hoarse, low. Ellery. My name cracked through the air like a whip. I hadn't told him. He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." I did. The studio was sparse, but alive. Sunlight poured through high windows, illuminating a sea of canvases stacked against the walls. Some were half-finished, some blank, some bursting with color. Oil, acrylic, charcoal, all of it. But there was one thing they all shared. A girl. Not always the same age, not always the same posture, but unmistakable in features. High cheekbones, olive skin, dark eyes with something questioning behind them. Me. "Sit," he said, gesturing to an old stool beside a work table. I sat. He remained standing, as if afraid that sitting might shatter the illusion of this moment. He whispered, "I've imagined this for 20 years. I thought this would never come." I studied him. "You knew?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I knew from the first moment I saw you in London. You were barely a year old. You reached for my paintbrush and bit my thumb. No child of Caldwell Shaw would do that." I blinked. "You met me?" "Twice, briefly. She, Marjorie, didn't allow more. She said you were mine, but that it was better if Caldwell believed otherwise. For her safety. For yours." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "And you agreed?" "I was young, idealistic, in love. And later, terrified. Caldwell was dangerous, Ellery. Not just emotionally. He had people, lawyers, silence dealers. He threatened to have me deported the moment he suspected." "And you let him?" He flinched. "I let her. She begged me to disappear. For you." My fists clenched. I grew up thinking I was defective, thinking I didn't fit because something was wrong with me. I know. I should have fought harder. I wanted to. But you vanished. The letters stopped coming. Every inquiry I made, I was warned off. Gallery doors closed to me overnight. I went from a rising talent to persona non grata in a week. "Because of him?" He nodded. "And you stayed here?" This was the only place they didn't reach, and it was the only place I could still paint you. That broke me. I stood and walked to the largest canvas on the far wall. A young woman stood in a storm, her back to the viewer. Her long coat flapped in the wind. In her hand, a broken frame. Above her, the sky burst with streaks of magenta and ash. The title etched in the corner, Nom effacé. Erased name. I turned to him. "I'm not erased anymore." His eyes shimmered. "I know." We talked for hours. He told me everything. How he met Marjorie during a gallery residency in London. How she was drawn to him, not for his status, but for his passion. How their affair lasted a year, hidden in spare rooms and painting studios. How she panicked when she became pregnant. How Caldwell offered her a lifeline, an ultimatum, and a guarantee of silence. And how, after me, she cut him out. I asked him why he never had other children. He shrugged. "Because I already had a daughter, even if I couldn't see her." By dusk, I asked him if he would come to London. He shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe never." "Why?" He looked at his hands. "Because my ghosts are still louder than my courage."
I left him with a hug that was too brief and too long all at once, and I took 3 of his paintings with me. When I returned to London, Pear had exploded. Julian had done an extraordinary job managing the press. Articles flooded in. A daughter's duality. Ellery Shaw paints the father she never knew. The Times. Ghosts in oil and glass. The boldest show in modern memory. Evening Standard. When blood is not enough, art remembers. Le Monde. Attendance was record-breaking. But that wasn't the most shocking thing. Because on the 3rd week of the show, I walked into the gallery and found 2 people waiting at the far end of the installation hallway. Marjorie and Caldwell, standing under the sculpture of the Faceless Man. I froze. They turned. Marjorie spoke first. "You always were theatrical." I didn't respond. Caldwell stepped forward. "We need to talk." "No," I said. "You need to listen." I walked past them into the back office and came out with a canvas, one they hadn't seen yet. I unwrapped it slowly. It was a diptych. On the left, the hallway of photographs, empty frames, cold walls. On the right, my current gallery, filled with color, light, and names. In the middle, a girl with a flame for a head. I hung it without a word. They watched in silence. Finally, Marjorie said, "You'll regret this one day." I already regretted everything else. Caldwell's lips thinned. "What do you want?" I smiled. "Nothing. That's the point. You took everything, so I built more." Julian entered, standing beside me. "I'm done hiding," he said. Marjorie looked between us. "We can fix this." "No," I said. "You can't, because you were never broken. We were." And I turned away. The next day, I launched a foundation. The Delacroix Shaw Initiative. Grants for erased artists, resources for those cut off from their histories, a fellowship in Laurent's name, hosted in Marseille. When I told him, he cried. He sent me a new painting of a phoenix rising from a pile of broken picture frames. He titled it, Enfin, At Last. And I hung it in the entrance of the Ellery, so that no one would forget that even when you're erased, you can write yourself back in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If the story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you.
Back in. The words echoed long after I left them on the gallery wall. Not just because they were the closing line of the show, but because I meant them. Every syllable, every inch of canvas, every smudge of paint, every hard-won breath that brought me to this moment. I had stepped back in, not just into my own story, but into my name, my body, my truth. But freedom, I'd soon learn, comes at a price. And sometimes the ghosts you bury claw their way up just when you think you've buried them for good. You. It always came back to you, the singular, defiant, intimate truth. No one else will hand you your name. You take it, you carve it, you bleed for it, and then you guard it like the treasure it is. But what no one told me was that once the world starts to say your name, really say it, you no longer own it alone.
Part 7 picks up directly from the last word of Part 6. Free. That word tasted different now. Less like rebellion, more like relief. Not the explosive kind that slams doors and shouts through canvases. No, this was the quiet kind. The kind that slips in through the cracks after the storm has passed and lays down roots. I had fought, bled, painted, testified, and endured. And now, at last, I could just exist. But art is never truly quiet, because once you give a voice to the silenced, you become a lighthouse. And lighthouses attract ships, but also storms. I didn't know her name at first. It started with a letter, plain white envelope, no return address, delivered not to the gallery, but to my flat, which was strange because that address wasn't public. Not even Julian knew it. I kept it separate, my sanctuary. The letter was handwritten, in slanted cursive, neat, precise, cold. You think you're the only one they erased. That was it. No signature, no contact info. Just that single, razor-sharp line. I read it 3 times. My stomach turned each time. I showed Julian. He frowned. Fan? He guessed. Or survivor, I said. Or both. A week later, I got another one. This time, a photograph was tucked inside. Black and white, faded. 3 children standing in front of a wrought iron gate. The middle child was unmistakably Julian. The one on the right was me, age 9 in a pleated skirt and a defiant scowl. But the third, a girl I didn't recognize. Same age, same uniform, same background, same eyes. The photo had something written on the back. Write Emasel Am. Ask Caldwell who she is. I called Julian. He said nothing for a long time. Then finally, that's not possible. Do you remember her? He paused. But the back entrance of the summer house in Dorset. We only spent 2 summers there. Maybe 2002, 2003? I called Laurent. He went silent too. Then softly, I think your mother had another child. I flew to Dorset the next morning. The summer house was still listed under a trust. Locked, shuttered, forgotten. I bribed a caretaker to let me in. Dust everywhere, mice droppings in the corners, but the bones of the place were intact. I walked the halls slowly, waiting for memory to stir. In the upstairs hallway, I found something that made my breath stop. A growth chart. Pencil markings, faint, but there. J, H 2002, 4 foot 6 inches. H 2002, 4 foot 3 inches. And beneath those, another. L, H 2002, 4 foot 2 inches. L. A third child. Another erased name. I returned to London with fire in my veins. Julian met me at the Ellery that evening. He brought files. Old estate records, travel logs, medical reports, and 1 passport copy. Lysandra Shaw, born March 2001, no death record, no transfer of custody, just vanished. We scoured everything. Old school enrollment lists, camp rosters, family calendars. There was nothing past 2008. Then I remembered something. The archive flash drive Julian gave me months ago. I dug through it again, this time deeper. I found a folder labeled S Archive. Inside, encrypted audio files. Julian and I worked all night decoding them. One of them was a voicemail. Marjorie's voice, panicked. I told you she found the drawings. I don't care if you think she's too young. I want her moved. She's asking too many questions. She saw the photo from Ellery's 3rd birthday. This has to stop, Caldwell. I won't have another one questioning our legacy. Another one was even worse. Caldwell's voice. Then send her to Harrogate. Let them deal with it. Wipe the records. Start over. Just like we did with Ellery. Just like we did with Ellery. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the photo until sunrise. Lysandra, a ghost in the background of my life. Always there, just out of frame. I made a decision. I went public. Again. This time, not with a gallery, with a call. If your name was ever erased, if you were ever told to forget who you are, contact us. We created a secure website. Within a week, we received over 4,000 submissions. But one stopped everything. A girl named Eliza, 19, living in Birmingham. She attached the photo from Dorset, and in her message she wrote, "I think I'm the one on the left. I don't remember much, just flashes. A gate, a woman with red nails, a man who never looked me in the eye, and a girl named Illy who gave me her bracelet." I froze, because I remembered that bracelet. It was gold-plated with tiny sun charms. I'd given it to someone who cried all the time and held my hand when no one was looking. Julian read the message, then looked at me. "Elle, we have to find her." We flew to Birmingham. We met at a coffee shop. She looked like me. Same mouth, same laugh, same nervous titch in her right eye. She brought the bracelet, still intact. We didn't cry right away. We stared, talked, filled in gaps. Then I asked the question, "Would you take a DNA test?" She nodded. We did it that afternoon. 3 days later, the results came. 99.6% sibling match. Lysandra Shaw was real. She had a new name now, Eliza Ward. Adopted at 9. Parents told she had no living relatives. She had been in the system for 2 years prior. Record sealed. Caldwell and Marjorie had erased her completely. But not anymore. We held a press conference together. Eliza told her story. The world listened, and for the first time since I was a child, I had a sister again.
Again, that word took on a different meaning now. Not recurrence, but redemption. The chance to rewrite history by choosing each other again, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. Eliza wasn't just a ghost uncovered. She was a heartbeat, a sister, a mirror to the younger version of me that had always wondered if I'd imagined the warmth that once existed in our home. Now I knew it had been real, and now I was ready to fight for it. Elijah moved into the guest flat above the Ellery within a week of the DNA results. It wasn't an easy adjustment. She'd grown up in a system that demanded caution, quietness, and invisibility. Now she was being pulled into the spotlight, into interviews, into headlines, into our family's unraveling legacy. But she was stronger than she knew. The night after she moved in, I found her standing in front of Enfant, Laurent's painting of the phoenix rising from broken frames. She traced her finger along the lower edge of the canvas, where he'd signed his name in fading copper ink. "He's our grandfather?" she whispered. I nodded. "And Marjorie is—" I hesitated. "She's our mother, biologically. But what that means is up to us now." Eliza exhaled slowly. "She won't acknowledge me, will she?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to.
Caldwell. It was strange how just a name could make the air feel colder, like someone had cracked a window in a sealed room. After everything, after the gallery openings, the lawsuits, the reunions, the victories, I still wasn't prepared for the way his name could silence my thoughts. But silence wasn't an option anymore, especially not after what that note implied. "There is one more name you've forgotten." I paced the office at the Ellery with the letter still in hand. Julian sat across from me, frowning, arms crossed. A half-eaten sandwich on his plate remained untouched. "He's baiting you," Julian said. "I know. He wants you to chase him." "I have to." Julian exhaled hard. "Why?" I looked at him. "Because if there's another sibling or someone else they erased, we can't leave them behind." He didn't argue. He knew better. I pulled out the archives again, the encrypted flash drive, the hidden folders. This time, I dug into the oldest documents, calendars, handwritten letters, obscure receipts. It took 3 days of no sleep and too much coffee, but I found it. A scanned letter, water-stained, folded 4 times, no sender address, no recipient name, just 3 words in careful script. She's with Clara. That was it. I dug deeper. Eventually, I found a reference in the estate logs from 1995, a single payment marked Clara W. It was for a private boarding facility in Suffolk. I made the call. An old woman answered. "Yes, I'm Clara Withers," she said, her voice like parchment and fire. I asked if she'd ever housed a child from the Shaw family. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, I wondered how long it would take. I drove to Suffolk alone. Julian offered to come, but I said no. This part, I needed to do it by myself. Clara lived in a converted farmhouse surrounded by open fields. The air was still, like even time paused out here. She opened the door herself, stooped, sharp-eyed, wrapped in a navy shawl. "I kept her safe," she said, before I even introduced myself. I blinked. "Who?" She stepped aside. "In here." The house smelled like dried lavender and turpentine. She led me to a small parlor. A fire burned low. On the mantel were a dozen framed drawings, childlike, wild with color, signed only with a looping M. "She's not here now," Clara said. "But she comes often. She lives in Brighton now, works in a bookshop, writes poetry." I stared at the drawings. "She," I asked, "is she—" "She's your half-sister." I sank into the nearest chair. Clara sat across from me. "Marjorie had her young, before Caldwell, before Laurent. She was sent here when she was 5. I was paid to raise her without attachment. No last names, no photos, no stories, just obedience." I felt my throat tighten. "Why?" Clara's eyes softened, just barely. "Because Marjorie's father said a child born out of wedlock would ruin the family's future, and Caldwell didn't want competition for inheritance, so they agreed to remove her quietly." "And her name?" Clara smiled faintly. "Muel." I whispered it aloud. "Muriel. Muriel." Clara gave me her contact. "She might not want to see you," she warned. "She doesn't trust easily." I understood, but I had to try. I called the number that night. Voicemail. I left a message. "Hi, I'm Ellery. I think we might be sisters." Nothing for 3 days. Then, one text. "Meet me at the Wren Bookshop, Tuesday, 4 p.m. The Wren was nestled on a quiet street in Brighton, tucked between a florist and a vintage tailor. The bell above the door jingled when I entered. The woman behind the counter looked up. Mid-30s, shaved head, wire-frame glasses, quiet intelligence in her expression. She didn't smile, but she nodded. "You're early." I swallowed. "Muriel?" "Some days." I blinked. She came around the counter and motioned towards a reading nook by the window. We sat. I waited. She spoke first. "I've known about you since I was 15. I looked at her. "How?" "I stole one of Clara's letters. She was keeping tabs on the family. There was a photo of you. You were 8, at a recital. Your name was written on the back. Ellery. I remember thinking, she has the name I was supposed to have." I couldn't speak. Muriel continued. "Then I found the records. Eventually.
I pieced it together. I realized I wasn't just abandoned, I was edited out. They made you the first, the visible one, the legitimate one. But you never had a choice either. No, I said. She studied me. You're nothing like her. Marjorie? Any of them. We sat in silence. Then I pulled out a small envelope. A photo. The three of us, Julian, Eliza, and me, outside the Ellery, smiling, unfiltered, real. I slid it across the table. There is room for one more. She stared at it. For a long time. Then she whispered, I write poetry because no one ever listened to my voice. I learned to give myself rhythm. Maybe now? Maybe I can give it story, too. I nodded. Would you like to read at our next show? Her eyes widened. You'd let me? I smiled. I want you to. And that was the beginning. 3 weeks later, we hosted a new installation. The names we were given, the names we keep. 4 artists, 4 siblings. Muriel read 3 original poems, standing beneath a sculpture she'd created, twisting wire wrapped in paper and thread, shaped like a tree with fractured roots and golden leaves. Julian performed spoken word. Elisa painted a mural live, building it stroke by stroke as Muriel spoke. And I unveiled a new canvas. 4 figures, standing in a field. No background, no titles, just names, written in charcoal above their heads. Ellery, Julian, Eliza, Muriel. No longer forgotten, no longer alone.
Forgotten. That word had haunted me once. For years, it was the ache under my ribs, the splinter in my voice, the question that slept under my skin. But now? Now it was a memory, a ghost exorcised by names spoken aloud, by hands held in public, by stories reclaimed in daylight. There were 4 of us now, and we were ready to write the ending ourselves. The unerasing. Not a word you'd find in legal dictionaries, but it was the only one that felt right. We weren't just testifying to what was lost, we were testifying to what we had found, each other, ourselves, and the names we'd been told were too inconvenient to remember. The courtroom was a cathedral of consequence. Marble pillars, carved ceilings, centuries of silence buried in the walls, but the echoes now belonged to us. Marjorie sat across from us, poised, elegant, empty. Caldwell beside her, thinner than I remembered, face grayer, colder. They didn't acknowledge us, didn't even look at us. But when the prosecutor read out the charges, I watched Marjorie's jaw twitch. Just once. It was enough. The evidence took days to present. Dozens of sealed records unsealed. Medical documents, birth certificates, adoption fraud ledgers, even digital voice files, including the one we'd found from Caldwell himself. Quote, "Start over, just like we did with Ellery." The gallery gasped when that played. Eliza leaned into me. Her hand trembled in mine. Murray stared straight ahead, unblinking. Julian's jaw clenched. And Marjorie? Still. Like ice. Then came our testimonies. Eliza went first. She read from her memoir, pages about being moved in the night, having her name changed without explanation, living in 6 homes before she turned 10. She ended with a simple truth. They didn't just erase me from their records. They erased me from my own story. But now I get to write the rest, and I choose to be seen. The silence after was unbearable. Then applause. The judge had to call for order. Murray went next. She stood alone, no notes. She said, "I wrote poems for people who didn't know I existed. I became a sentence instead of a person. I stitched myself together with metaphors because I had no memory. But today, I speak as myself. No metaphor, no mask, just Murray." The court clerk cried. So did I. Julian testified last. His voice was low, measured, devastating. I watched it happen. I didn't understand it then, but I knew something was wrong. I remember the photographs disappearing, the holidays being redrawn. I remember being told not to ask questions, and I obeyed. And I regret that. But I'm here now. I see them now. All 3 of them. And I will not forget them again. Then it was my turn. I stood. Hands at my sides. Voice steady. My name is Ellery Shaw. And that name wasn't given to me out of love. It was given out of legacy, but I gave it meaning. Not them, me. I paused. They erased me from their walls, their wills, their family tree. But I painted myself back in, and I made space for everyone else they cut out.
I stepped down without another word. The trial lasted 6 weeks. In the end, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty. On all counts: fraud, child endangerment, identity tampering, conspiracy to conceal. Marjorie's sentence, 18 years. Caldwell's, 22. No parole for the first 10. The news hit every major outlet. Legacy on trial. The family that erased its own. From gallery to courtroom, the fall of the Shaw dynasty. The siblings who reclaimed a bloodline. We didn't celebrate. We gathered in silence. On the rooftop. The same one where we dreamed of the Institute. Eliza raised a glass. To the ones who were never meant to be found. Murray added, to the ones who found themselves anyway. Julian smiled. To the future. I held up my glass. To the end of forgetting. That night, I sat alone in the atrium, under the skylight, watching the latest student sculpture rise from the platform. It was a sphere made of broken rulers, one small plaque beneath it. We measure differently now. I cried. Not from grief, but from release. A month later, the British Museum invited me to curate a special retrospective, but I declined. I had another idea. We opened a permanent gallery inside the Institute. We called it the Name Gallery. Every month, a new artist told the story of a name, lost, found, chosen, reclaimed. And every year, we held a remembrance night. Names read aloud, hundreds, sometimes thousands. People we never knew, but people we would never forget. Laurent passed quietly. 2 years later, in his sleep, in Marseille. We buried him beside the olive tree he painted on his studio wall. Beatrice read a poem Murray had written. Eliza placed her sun charm bracelet in the soil. Julian brought a framed photo of us four. I brought his first paintbrush. And on his gravestone, we etched one line. He painted us back into the world. I still dream sometimes. Not of the erasures, but of the gallery, filled with light, voices, names spoken aloud, unafraid, and at the center, 4 portraits, not framed in gold, but in memory, in truth, in art. Us. To be continued.
Part 12 picks up directly from the last word of Part 11. Us. Not as we were rewritten, not as we were hidden, not as they tried to sculpt us, but as we chose to be seen, together, unashamed, uninterrupted. And yet, the story wasn't over, because legacy doesn't vanish when you end a name. It transforms. 2 years after the trial, The Institute stood stronger than ever. We had expanded. A second campus opened in Johannesburg. A satellite program began in Sao Paulo. A digital residency brought in hundreds of erased artists from war-torn regions who finally had the resources to tell their stories. The original Ellery Gallery still held its place at the heart of everything, a tribute and a living organism. But we knew the time had come. Not for endings, but for passage. We gathered on a late September evening. Julian, Eliza, Mireille, and I, along with the board, the fellows, the graduates, and the new class of artists. The atrium overflowed with light. The final sculpture of the year had been unveiled just an hour earlier. A bridge made of typewriters. Letters dangling on strings above it, sentences gathered from real letters written, but never sent. The title? The Unsent Becomes Us. It was time for the keynote, and they asked me to speak. I stepped on stage, not nervous, but aware, because this was my last time addressing the community as its creative director. I have worn many names. Erased, forgotten, outcast, inconvenient, and for a long time I thought those names were my fate. A murmur in the crowd. No phones out, no cameras, just attention. But names can be reclaimed. Stories can be rewritten. And sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply to be seen. I paused. I am stepping down not because the story is over, but because it's become too large for one voice. You've made this. You are the next name keepers. I looked to Eliza, to Julian, to Mireille. To those who have known silence, fill the world with sound. To those who have lived in shadows, stand in the brightest places. And to those who still whisper their names only in secret, I see you. We all do. I stepped down. The applause roared, and I knew I'd never stand on that stage again, because now it belonged to them. The next director of the Institute was unanimously elected, Mireille. She wept when the decision was announced, not from doubt, but from awe. She took the helm with fire and elegance. Under her leadership, the programming expanded, incorporating language labs for displaced dialects, visual storytelling for survivors of historical silencing, and programs for incarcerated artists. She changed the motto of the Institute from "We remember the forgotten" to "We were never gone." Eliza launched a publishing house, Sun Charm Press. Her first release was a poetry anthology of works from artists once lost in the system. Her second was a children's book, a story about a girl who planted her name in the ground like a seed and waited for it to bloom. It was dedicated to all three of us, Julian, Eliza, and me. Meanwhile, Julian became an international advocate for identity rights. He lobbied governments to change the way adoption records were sealed. He fought for every erased person's right to their own history. He gave TED Talks. He joined panels. He refused interviews unless the artist's name was included first. The world began to change, in small ways, then in massive ones. The Ellery Archive was launched 5 years to the day after the original exhibition. It became the largest curated database of erased names and reclaimed identities in the world. Interactive, multilingual, free. On launch day, we had 2.5 million visitors. By week's end, that number had doubled. Submissions flooded in. People found relatives. Heirs were reunited. Truths that had been buried for generations saw daylight. A woman in Morocco found the sister her family said had died in infancy. A man in Brazil discovered he was the son of a Chilean poet who'd been exiled and erased. A teacher in Kansas located her birth mother after 34 years of silence. Names restored. Histories rewritten.
It was never about fame. It was always about recording the truth. Years passed. Laurent's paintings were shown in the Louvre. Beatrice became the Institute's ambassador to Europe. The Delacroix family name, once whispered with scandal, was now spoken with reverence in every corner of the art world. But I didn't return to the spotlight. I moved. Not far, a seaside town in southern England. I opened a small gallery, private, quiet, open by appointment only. I called it Echo, because that's what we were now. Not the scream, but the sound that lingers long after. One afternoon, Eliza visited. She brought her daughter, a little girl with my mother's cheekbones and Laurent's eyes. She ran into the gallery and gasped, "Mommy, that's my name!" I turned. A painting hung by a window, sunlight falling across it. One word written in watercolor strokes, Amari. I smiled. Eliza grinned. She told me she wanted to be named in colors, so we painted her name together. I bent down beside Amari. "Do you like your name?" She nodded, beaming. "It's mine." "Yes, it is." Before they left, Eliza handed me a letter. Not sealed. I opened it after they drove away. Inside, "You built something they couldn't touch, and because of that, you built me. Love always, your sister." I walked down to the shore that night, sketched waves, listened to the wind, and thought of the past, not with bitterness, but with resolute, because I had learned that even when names are stripped away, the soul keeps speaking, in brushstrokes, in stories, in voices that rise again and again until no one can unhear them. To be concluded.